exports and imports separately. 1930, imports and exports are pretty small. So the net is zero, and the level of exports and imports is still pretty small, like 5%. So it's a pretty small share of the economy back in 1930. Much bigger today, 16, 18, 20% today. All right, here we go. This is a romp through data. Are you ready? Output. This is showing real GDP 1900 to 1941, and you can pretty easily pick out the decline, 1929 to 1930, and the first recovery. There's the second dip, there's the second recovery. So it goes down, comes back up, goes back down, comes back up again. Looking at the 1920s, not a bad decade. 1920s were pretty cool. Real GDP per person was rising 3% per year in the 1920s, fueled largely by consumption and construction. From 29 to 33, real GDP per capita fell nearly 9% per year. Overall, it was about 30-some%, but on a 9% per year average basis, that's a lot. That's about, the economy was contracting about 9% in the worst of the crisis, 2007, early 2008, and that was the time when, Krugman describes it as the time when everybody was saying, oh my God, we're all going to die. So imagine that happening for 4 years running. Real GDP doesn't hit its previous peak until 1940, real GDP per capita, and it doesn't return to trend until 1942. So that's why it's the decade of the Great Depression, because it takes a full decade plus to return to previous peak and then a little bit more to return to previous trend. Here's the same picture, but extending the data from 1900 all the way to 2011. At that point, the 30s don't show up as much because the economy has grown so much over the last 70 years. Although you can still sort of pick out here the decline, the fact that GDP is below trend here in the 30s, above trend for World War, and then gets back to the trend in the late post-World War II period. For an international comparison, this is from the article by Romer, which I think is the one that's in the Reader. I don't remember what I left in the Reader. And this is showing comparing the U.S. with France, Germany, the U.K., and Japan, just to show you that the United States turned down earlier and turned down deeper than the other countries. So Japan had a very mild downturn. The United States is the line down here at the bottom. Germany's marching along with, as it were, along with the United States in terms of having a relatively deep downturn, but France and the UK have a milder downturn than we do. So it's pretty, things are bad in the United States, and they're worse in the United States than they are in other countries. Unemployment rate, again, data that were backcast. So there was no what's it called? It's not consumer purchases. It's current population survey. Is that right? There was no current population survey in 1929, so there was no group that was calling up 65,000 households, asking them a series of questions with which to come up with the data that are in Table A1 of the BLS report the first Friday of the month. So this is all data that has been created from available resources. Some people dispute some of, they may change the numbers a little bit, but they don't change them substantially enough to worry about it. So if you look at that graph and you squint so that you're not really seeing real well what the numbers are, you're going to get the same pattern regardless of which economic historian you talk to. So somebody may say, oh, it's not 25.2, it's 24.7, but I don't care. They're still going to get that. So unemployment in the 1920s is pretty good. It's generally low. It peaks at over 25% by most estimates in 1933. It stays above 10% throughout the 1930s, and it doesn't fall to the pre-1929 level until 1942. Here's the same data. Table 1 in your handout. The graphs are at the back, the numbers are at the front in your handout. Table 1 shows you the values year by year. So you can see here in 1929, as we go into recession, the average unemployment for the year is 3.2%, hits a peak here of 25% in 1933, and doesn't get back below 10% until 1941. It's a decade of pain. Unemployment rate's coming down during the recovery, but notice that it gets to a low of 14% in 1937. So this is not what you'd call a everybody's happy really quickly sort of recovery. Capacity utilization is a way essentially of coming up with an unemployment rate for those machines and buildings. So capacity utilization takes and looks at the amount of physical capital, the machines and buildings that we talked about for investment spending, and looks at what percentage of the physical capacity of the machines and buildings is currently being used to produce. So if you take 100 minus the numbers that are in this table, you get essentially an unemployment rate for machines and buildings that you can compare with the unemployment rate for labor. So you can see here in the 1920s, we've got a really high level of capacity utilization. It peaks here in 1923 at 94 or 91% in 1925. So the peak level is around 90-some%. Typically, how for unemployment, we think we wouldn't want the unemployment rate to get terribly far below 5 or so, or we would face a lot of inflation. They usually figure that the best for capacity utilization is 90-ish. So if we're using 90 or so % of capacity, that's full employment, unquote, of the capital stock, the machines and buildings. Look at what happens in the 1930s. It's a low of 42 in 1932. So 60% of the nation's factories and machines were not being used in 1932. 60% unemployment rate of machinery and buildings. That's huge. It's just amazing. It comes back up, but it's coming back up somewhat slowly. So even by 1939, we're only at a 72% capacity utilization. Prices, not surprisingly, got high unemployment, low capacity utilization, low rates of growth of output. So prices in the 1920s, where's my 1920s? Here's the 20s. Prices in the 1920s, once we get past the World War I price adjustment, so that's this spike here, is a price adjustment following World War I, where there have been a lot of price controls in place. For most of the 1920s, prices are basically stable. So we don't have rapid inflation, we don't have rampant deflation, we've got basically stable prices. They are at a higher level than have been the case for the previous 3 decades. So if you look at the average, this is the CPI, look at the average value of the CPI 1889 until World War I starts in 1913, and that's, 27-ish. Or so. Prices are stable in the 1920s, but they're stable at nearly twice the height, twice the level, twice the value, twice the something of the pre-World War I prices. So they're steady, but certainly higher than they had been before the war. Then the Depression hits, and when the Depression hits, the prices fall. Consumer prices fall about 25% from peak to trough. Wholesale prices, so what producers pay, it's now called producer price index, falls about 30% from peak to trough. Businesses. This is a business failure rate. So this is what share of businesses are going out of business in any year. So what's the failure rate of businesses? It's expressed out of 1,000. So this is the number per 1,000. So when it's at 100, that means 10% of businesses are going out of business. What's interesting about this is the 1920s. So here's the post-war adjustment. But throughout the 1920s, the business failure rate stays somewhat elevated. Probably an indicator of structural change. So the 1920s, we've got electrification. So a change in how families are powering their homes, a change in how factories are powering their factories. There's a lot of other changes going on in the 1920s, so that the goods that people used to buy, they're no longer buying, and they're buying new goods instead. It's very similar to what we had around here 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I forget how long it's been. There used to be a store on Bancroft that was called Gordon's Typewriter Repair. Gordon's typewriter repair is no longer because very few people in the room have typewriters. There's still one typewriter repair place apparently in Berkeley, but there used to be multiple numbers of them. So when there's structural changes in the kinds of goods that we buy, it's not surprising that the businesses that had been producing the goods we're no longer buying are going to see a decline in their business. So we get a relatively high failure rate throughout the 1920s, probably part of this churning of the structural change that's going on. Banks, we've seen this data before. The number of banks in the economy peaks actually in 1920. So the bank failures begin not in 1929, the bank failures begin in 1920, and we get that whole run of bank failures we talked about in the context of looking at David Wheelock's article on Kansas. But the number of banks that fail, how do I say that sentence? The failure rate skyrockets. So banks fail much more quickly, is that good? Much more often and much more quickly starting in 1929. We had 3 time periods where we had major bank runs. Another movie I didn't get to show you. There's 2 bank run movies. One is It's a Wonderful Life. So there's the bank run, and how many people have seen It's a Wonderful Life? So there's the bank run and It's a Wonderful Life when they're trying to go off on their honeymoon, and there's the bank run and everybody's going to the bank, and they never do get their honeymoon as far as I can tell. And so they get out of the cab and they go and they say they have $1 left at the end. The other movie, what's the other movie that has a bank run? Mary Poppins. How many people have seen Mary Poppins? Mary Poppins has a bank run in it. Jane and Michael go down to the bank to see their father, and the old man's actually Dick Van Dyke, and the old man won't give Michael his tuppence. And Michael says, give me my money, give me my money. He stomps his foot and throws a little tantrum, and everybody else says, the bank won't give somebody their money, and there's a run on the bank. And that's why they went to fly a kite, because Michael's father got fired. Jane and Michael Banks, his name was Banks, I thought it was, anyway, Mr. Banks got fired from the bank because his son triggered the bank run. So he comes home, he's lost his job, and that's why they can sing Let's Go Fly a Kite, because his dad no longer has a job. I know, and I don't have time to show you the movie. Major bank runs in the United States, October 1930, spring 1931, January 1933. I should have said at the beginning, there is so much research on the Great Depression that we could fill this room with papers and books that have been written and are currently being written on the Great Depression. So I'm going to tell you what, good stories for some of this stuff. We could do a whole semester on this slide. You could do a whole semester doing just what's happening in the banking sector in the 1930s. We're not. We're going on. Guys. The bank holiday. So Franklin Roosevelt, we got the 3rd bank run is January 1933, and there's a contagion effect, right? So in the same sense in which people hear Michael say that the man won't give him his tuppence, and so there's this panic, and everybody starts to run on the bank. You get a contagion effect where when there's one person who goes down to the bank and can't get their money, then there's another person, it spreads like the flu. And so what Franklin Roosevelt does is one of the first acts of the Roosevelt administration is to declare a bank holiday. Closed all the banks. So there's an emergency act of Congress. They close all the banks on March 9th, 1933, 5 days after his inauguration. And they say that we, the federal government, will reopen these banks once we have inspected them and made sure that they are sound. And you can be confident in your bank. And it takes a week before the banks start to be reopened. They don't reopen all the banks. As they do reopen the banks, the confidence is restored. People bring their cash back to the banks. And that later we get the federal deposit insurance. But it does stop the runs. It's KOPEC tape for banks. Same information. There's the graph again. Table. I got to put my glasses on to see what it is. Table 3 shows you the number of banks that close and the number of banks in operation. Notice that by 1933 we're at 14,000 banks in operation. We started at over 30,000 banks. So we have half as many banks by 1933 as we had at the peak in 1920. Financial sector more generally, the stock market peaks in September of 1929. As many of you know, there are crashes on Black Thursday and Black Tuesday, October 24th and October 29th, 1929. The stock market does not return to its previous peak until 1951. It takes 22 years for the stock market to return to its 1929 value. That seems like a long time until you look at the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ peaked at 5,000 in March of 2000, which is 13 years ago. So 13 years ago, the NASDAQ peaked at 5,000. The NASDAQ today, somebody has an iPhone out. I know. There, you have your iPhone out. Look up the NASDAQ. Pop in. Look up the NASDAQ for me. As long as you're on your phone, do something useful with it. Look up the NASDAQ. 3,200. So the NASDAQ today closed at 3,200. And that's phenomenal. Yeah. You don't even want to go there. But this comparison was nominal terms as well. So it took 22 years. In this period, it'll take probably 22 years for the NASDAQ to recover its previous peak. Whoops. There's a picture that shows you not only the prices on the bottom, but also the shares sold on the top. And you can see the huge stock market boom that's here, particularly 1925-ish to 1929. We could put a graph along here that showed the stock market boom 2000-ish to 2007. Oh, what else do we get? Bad mortgage debt. Lots of foreclosures, both non-farm and farm foreclosures. The farm foreclosures soar because of high farm mortgage debt, low farm earnings, and too much expansion in World War I. Let me show you the pictures. Table 6 is the numbers. The left column is the non-farm. The right column is the farm. These are foreclosures. The right is a map that's showing you the states. Let's see, the top is 1926 to 30, the bottom is 1931 to 40, and it's showing you which states had the most and which states had the least amount of foreclosures. So in the 1920s, we got the, whatever this isn't even, this is the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho, oh God, help, Wyoming, Colorado, and Arizona. I always have to, I can't pick them, I gotta go one by one to get those. And then the 30s is, of course, the Farm Belt. So Ken Burns has that new movie on the Dust Bowl. You can go see parts of the Dust Bowl and catch that. Interest rates. Interest rates are going every which way. Some interest rates are stable, so interest rates on government bonds are stable. Interest rates on prime commercial paper are down, but interest rates on BAA bonds, which I don't know why I don't have this on the table. That's stupid. Interest rates on BAA bonds are going up. So some interest rates are going up, some interest rates are going down. Table 7 shows you some of these interest rates. So we've got Fed discount rate, business rates, and so on. However, the real interest rate, which is the nominal rate minus the inflation rate, real interest rates are going up. So the real interest rate subtracts the inflation rate, what we think is what's going to happen to prices. There's two different graphs here. One is the realized rate and one is the expected real rate. So for the expected real rate, that's using what's the expected inflation rate. So as I stand here in 2013, I'm going to subtract from the nominal interest rates in 2013 what I think the inflation rate will be in 2014. And the other is the realized rate, which uses the actual inflation rate. We also call these, sometimes we call this ex ante. The expected is the ex ante real rate, and the actual is the ex post real rate. I heard that phrase coming, right? Ex ante and ex post. And in both cases, what we get 29 to 33 is we get, here's the blue line, the vertical line is showing you 1929, and so you get that the real rates are going up. So nominal rates in some quarters were going down, but at the same time, because prices were going down so fast, real rates were rising. Wealth. The wealth distribution worsens. So the way to look at this is that can you see the colors? Oh, good. The gray bars at the top are the share of wealth owned by the top 1% of the population. The red bars at the bottom are the share of wealth owned by the bottom 99% of the population. When the line goes down, the wealth distribution is worsening, more to the top, less to the 99%. When the line goes up, the wealth distribution is improving, less to the top, more to the 99%. So in the 1920s, there we are, 1920s. In the 1920s, the wealth distribution is worsening. So the top 1% is having more and more wealth. The bottom 99% have a smaller share of the pie. That's wealth. We can also look at income. The work on income distribution has been done by Emmanuel Sayez of our department here. This is showing the share of income going to the top 10%. And let's see, where's 1929? There's 1929. So here again in the 1920s, the income distribution is worsening. Oh wow, look at that. Last time did it again more recently. How about that? Income distribution is getting much worse in the 1920s. And you can break it out. That shows the top 10%. That's with and without capital gains. And this breaks the top 1, the top 5, and the top 10% income group. And again, you can see, which one is this? That is particularly here, the top 1%. Wow, same thing up here, isn't it? It's particularly the top 1% is getting a larger share of income in the 1920s and in the 1990s. What else do I have? Ooh, no, I don't have time. All right, I'll start there on whenever the next time is that we're here.